Hour number 2 of Purple Daily. We welcome right in our friend from Pro Football Focus, Eric Eager. And here is my question for you, Eric. The consensus across the board, the entire world has gathered together to praise the Minnesota Vikings draft and raise it up and show it to everyone. Look at this draft. It's wonderful. And I have a really tough time arguing with that. Do you have any sort of counterpoint to people who have said the Vikings have had a really, really good draft?
No, the hard part is, you and I think have been really fair to the Vikings this offseason, and up until Thursday, their offseason has been bad. I mean, not a lot of direction. Buying into Kirk Cousins while trying to, showing off, the rebuild in other areas, and then they go with this draft, and I think, it's going to be tough for them to really hit on this until 2021, given the pandemic and everything. But I can't argue with a whole lot of what they've done. They did a really good job. They took a lot of swings of the bat. And I think they got, 3 or 4 first round players in their first 4 picks. So, no, I can't argue. They did a great job.
All right, which one is the best pick then, considering where they were selected, what they might contribute, what they could become? Who did you like the most out of this draft?
I think Gladney is probably the best, going to end up being the best player. He was somebody in myself and George Shahuri's mock. We had him going 20th to the Jacksonville Jaguars, which ends up being a really good pick for them. We also had Ezra Cleveland going in the first round of our mock as well. So those 2 picks to me, I think, are the best ones, just because the Vikings clearly need defensive back help. They clearly needed offensive line help, and I think they got 2 first round talents way after, where they, were, we would have projected them to go. Justin Jefferson's a good player. And I think, there's the only issue with me with him is he's, I think, a little limited in the sense we don't have any tape or any analytics on him playing anywhere but the slot at LSU. But he's a good football player. And then I think Cameron Dantzler's a guy who they got really lucky to get when they got him, because he would not have been available to them as late as he was, if not for having misunderstood, what he needed to do in the combine, which was not to gain weight, which was to actually run fast, because that's what defensive backs do. So they got great value, I think, at all 4 of their picks. And then later on they got, I didn't necessarily like the order of any of those players, sometimes, but they got some pretty good ones in the later 11 of their draft picks.
Yeah, I felt the same way, where it was sort of weird how maybe they overdrafted one guy in the late rounds, but then drafted another one that could have been higher and so forth. And I think that they just had their eye on certain people of who other teams might also pick in the 7th. So you pick him in the 6th or you pick him in the 5th, so the other teams don't get him if you think that he was a popular prospect or whatever. There are things that go on beyond the scenes on day 3 that we don't really fully understand. And sometimes you go, why'd you pick a long snapper? And then it turns out that they knew they could get the receiver in undrafted free agency, but they couldn't get the long snapper. And at that point also, if you're getting upset about that, I don't know how to help you. And I love this stuff, but I even can't get worked up about who you picked in the 5th, 6th, and 7th and how you did it. But let me circle back to Justin Jefferson and where he fits in. He played in the slot a lot at LSU. Their outside receiver, Jamar Chase, is top 5 pick for next year. Yeah, he's an unbelievable player, which if there's any reason to doubt Joe Burrow, these 2 fellas are the reason to do it. But how do we figure out how Justin Jefferson is going to fit in to the Minnesota Vikings offense right away and what type of value he could give?
Yeah, it's really tricky, because when you look last season, so he played, it's crazy, but he played 900 and, if you add special teams, let's just clear out special teams. He played 937 snaps. He played 5 snaps at wide receiver. So there's, when we do our projection systems, it's basically like, he's exactly the reason why, and you've seen these before. It's exactly the reason why we let you toggle through some of the situations, because for him, it's an absolute question mark as to how he's going to project playing on the outside, in a place like Minnesota. So for me, like, for him to be good in year 1, possibly playing with a shortened off season and so forth, he has to play in the slot, for it to be anything of a sure thing. And that's fine. I mean, they have Tajay Sharp, they have Adam Thielen obviously is one of the best wide receivers in all of football. So I think he can help there, but it's somewhat perplexing in that they're trying to be a two wide receiver offense, that they would take a guy who's predominantly played in three or four wide receiver offenses. That would be my only negation here. But he runs we think of slot guys being slow. No, he ran in the 4.4s. He, contested catches. No one had caught contested balls at a higher rate than he did last year. We all talk about how Burrow elevated that offense. But the receivers had to be on the other end of it. And those guys were making, AJ Terrell was drafted in the first round, 16th by the Falcons. They were making him look like a fool during the national championship game. So, he's a good prospect. I wonder about team fit, and that's why I don't think he's the best player the Vikings, the best value the Vikings got, even though he was their highly drafted player.
So when we talk about this and how a guy might look in the slot versus outside, now if this was old school where it was, just where the two wide receivers on the outside line up right next to the boundary, I would say, okay,
Right.
I get that, but they don't anymore. And Gary Kubiak loves his tight splits to get really football-y on you. But I mean, how do we factor that in when someone is an outside wide receiver, but maybe they're lined up closer to the line of scrimmage to give them that two-way go? I think that might be some of the answer to how they use Justin Jefferson, and the fact that now the Vikings can mix in and work in different types of receivers in different types of spots. So, you can use BC Johnson, as more of the true outside guy when you want to do that. You can have Jefferson on the inside. And also, you're going to have a lot of third downs. I mean, you're going to need a slot receiver and three wide receivers on third downs. And Irv Smith, you can kind of move all over the place. He can be outside, and you can have Jefferson inside. So I think what they've got here is a lot of versatility and options for the way that they put him in based on who else is on the roster and what kind of offense they run.
Yep, and absolutely. And that's the thing. I mean, it's so hard. We look at the highest drafted wide receiver this year was Henry Ruggs of Alabama, and he was, I think, the fourth most productive receiver on that team. But that's a lot. You watch the Kansas City Chiefs last year; they drafted McCole Hardman out of Georgia, and it was the same thing. He was less productive because he had to play with a bunch of other players.
Yeah.
But being a starter on an SEC team that's in the national title hunt is a feat in and of itself. And the same thing with Jefferson. Jefferson's probably playing in the slot at LSU because, as what you're saying, Jamar Chase is a superstar, probably a top 5 pick next year if he does what he did last year. And that's, he's in the slot because they're trying to get their best 4 players on the field all the time in passing situations. So I'm not, the issue is maybe not that he can't do it. It's just that we haven't seen him do it. And so it's going to be a little bit of an acclimation project. So it might be the case where, BC Johnson plays, base downs, or Tarzay Sharp plays base downs early in the season. Jefferson comes in and plays only, on true passing downs. And then he evolves into the role, or they use him, as you said, creatively, where they maybe have 2 receivers to one side and he's the inside player. But there's a ton of different things that they can do with him. My only regret for Minnesota in this draft from the positional standpoint is, other than KJ Osborne, they didn't get another receiver who, I think can complement what Jefferson does. They did a great job at cornerback. It was a heavy cornerback draft, and they weren't satisfied with just Gladney. They went and got Dantzler. I think that was a terrific move on the defensive side of the ball. I think they probably could have done something similar with the receiver position, because there were guys like James Prochet, some of the guys that the Ravens got, I really liked for the Vikings, and they just didn't. But that's splitting hairs at this point.
Yeah, I feel the same way that, when we get to that 5th, 6th, 7th rounds, a lot of people wanted interior offensive linemen. And my comment is, all right, well, show me the great interior offensive lineman prospects that end up at that point. And even though, there were some that maybe PFF was higher on, you still, if the entire NFL is passed over that many times, you still can't go crazy on it. Same with KJ Hill. Like, KJ Hill was a guy that in the 6th or 7th round, wherever he went, I would have said, yeah, why not take a shot on him? But there's also probably a reason why nobody did. Let's talk about Ezra Cleveland and where he fits in here, because the athletic profile looks so much like Brian O'Neill that they're going to be the Spider-Man meme when they show up at training camp. They still have Riley Reif on the roster. They did not trade for Trent Williams, and there's a possibility he could start at left tackle and have Riley Reif move inside. There's a possibility Reif stays at left tackle. Cleveland competes for a guard spot with Drew Samia and a couple other guys. I mean, what do you like for him right away and then long term?
Yeah, he's certainly somebody who, when you look at his projections, is comp is Brian O'Neill, which is awesome for the Vikings because somebody said this: the Vikings have had exactly one offensive lineman make a Pro Bowl appearance this last decade, and it was Matt Khalil in 2012, who was an alternate who played in the
Yikes.
game because of an injury. They have not. They have done really poorly at this entire collection of five players for a long time. O'Neill being the shining light there. So I like what they did with Cleveland. His athleticism is awesome. I think of the players that you would want to move inside, it's Reef just because he's got a little bit, wear and tear on the tires. It's a little less movement to play guard, and they can really lean into that zone blocking scheme
Yeah.
with some athletes there at the position. I also like Blake Randall too, the guy they got later on. He almost produced as much value last season in a wins above replacement sort of standpoint as Cleveland. So I think they got a couple good players there, but I do think Cleveland probably starts out at tackle because if you're rebuilding, what you don't want to do is you don't want to put a guy at guard one year and then put him at tackle. There's not as much developmental value in doing that. It's just to say, look, Reef's not going to be here long term. We have to lean into him at guard.
Right.
Let's put Cleveland at tackle. I think if he's worthwhile now, we've shown that offensive line it's really hard to be really good early on. So it might just be a situation where it's better off for him to stick. But if he's good enough to play in an abbreviated offseason, I would just play him at left tackle and put Reef at guard and shore up a spot that's been a problem for them for years.